Hi, welcome to the Rittner Floral School in Boston, Mass. I'm Dr. Steve Rittner, and it's a pleasure to welcome you into one of our classrooms today. We've got a neat little discussion demonstration for you, and I think you're going to really enjoy it. The subject of this particular discussion is going to be containers, and I think you're going to really find our approach on this to be interesting. Now, typically, when we think of containers, we like to talk about the kind of material the container is made of. Perhaps it happens to be glassware. Perhaps it happens to be ceramic. Perhaps it's something that's more along the lines of wicker type things. Sometimes we'll talk in terms of whether it happens to be a little bit more classical in feeling or whether it's more contemporary in feeling. Sometimes we'll talk in terms of the color or the texture of the kind of container. But the thing that we find as floral designers is that containers really have a lot to say in terms of how our designs are made up, the atmospherics of them, the whole theme of our designs. I like to say to my classes that containers are our friends and they can do so much for us, but each has their own unique kind of quirks and circumstances. One of my favorite kinds of containers are novelty type containers. This is a container, for example, that simulates a hat of a caroler for use around the Christmas season. We're going to deal in this particular presentation with a very, very specific kind of novelty type container. And I think you, my viewer, are really going to enjoy it. What we're going to be concentrating on in this particular presentation are the use of shoes, boots, things of that nature to enhance our floral designing. Now, these can take different forms. For example, let's look at this particular design. This is a simulated boot. It's actually a piece of glassware. It's a piece of glassware that feels like a boot. It's actually shaped like one. We can do some very, very neat things with these. They're really, really fun. They're fun and funky, and we can come up with all kinds of effects. And again, in this particular case, we've got two different designs here. The one over on this side, we have some alstroemeria. The alstroemeria is surrounded with some of our beautiful roses, some tulips, some button palms, a little bit of our delphinium shooting out in the back. It's just a lovely casual display of some flowers, but in a very unique kind of base. Here is a second variation on that. In the second variation, we have a very different kind of theme. Rather than mostly white with a touch of color here and there, this particular one is making use essentially of a just beautiful hydrangea surrounded by some of our very, very pretty roses. So this is a good start in terms of coming up with something that has this particular kind of theme. But there are other items out there that will work as well. Instead of glassware, we can go in another direction. For example, this happens to be a shoe container. Isn't this a neat one? This particular shoe container is one put out by the people at Supermoss, and it's really, really neat. It is a container shaped like a shoe, but completely covered with moss, which would make sense because it's coming from Supermoss. And we've got a nice mixture in here. Our staff has been working very, very hard preparing some of the things for this particular demonstration. I think you're going to find some of the interesting variations we have are really fun. So we've got this funky container that's shaped like a shoe, and then all kinds of things in it. We have carnations, we have miniature carnations, some yellow button palms, some statice, a little bit of our delphinium, some alstroemeria. It is absolutely gorgeous, and it's a very, very neat kind of container. These kinds of containers are fun, they're funky. They add a lot of personality. In other words, when we're thinking in terms of coming up with containers for our designs, let's think outside of the box, or maybe inside the shoe. And we can come up with some very, very interesting type things. These make wonderful gifts. They make really neat conversational pieces within your home. You can do so much with them, and the kinds of variations of florals in them, well, you can go in all kinds of directions. Now, we're showing you one of these Supermoss containers, but let me show you, my viewer, another variation on this. Here is another container. This one feels almost like the little old lady who lived in the shoe. Again, making use of our hydrangea up here, surrounding it with some of our palms. They don't have to be fancy. They don't have to be unusual in terms of content. Just the nature of the container itself makes it a very, very interesting kind of piece. So we can go in so many different directions. Here, my viewer, let me show you another idea that goes along with the same kind of thing. We can come up with something that is a generic kind of thing that could be used at any time, such as these super moss type containers. Or once in a while, we'll find something that's very definitely themated for a holiday. So here we've got a container that definitely says St. Patrick's Day. Or how about this one? Here we've got a container shaped like a boot. We're thinking Santa's boot in this particular case, making use of our traditional Christmas colors of red and green. And then on the top we've got a melange of some just beautiful things here. We've got some red carnations, we've got some red miniature carnations, some white miniature carnations, some white roses, some glass millimeter balls to come up with something that is very, very seasonal. So you can see that when we're talking about the use of shoes and boots, we can also think in terms of something that's very, very specific for holidays during the year. And that's something that perhaps will give a little bit different kind of effect to some of your holiday designing. So we can play with it from that point of view. But wait, there's more. We can play with other kinds of approaches using this concept of shoes. If we're going to talk about shoes, then let's talk about shoes. Hey, why not? Isn't that neat? Isn't that cool? Now, when you're doing something like this, you really have to consider very, very carefully what you're doing in terms of the base. If you're using a shoe, it always is a good idea to take one that perhaps you've outgrown, or perhaps a loved one has outgrown, something that they're not all that worried about in terms of water damage. Even so, on something like this, it's always a good idea to take a little bit of plastic, put a plastic liner of some sort, some cellophane or plastic wrap inside before we put our foam in there, and then make sure that we're not oversaturating in terms of water. But a very, very pretty idea, making use of an actual shoe, a couple of our Fujis, several white roses on one side, a line of some of our red roses on the other. It's quick to do, easy to do, simple to do, and so much fun. Here's another example, making use of the same kind of shoe. Of course, if we've got one shoe, we've got to have a second one. We've deliberately let some of the plastic show here. Again, we used a liner on this. We would have normally tucked that in, but I want you, my viewer, to see it so that you can get an idea in terms of what you can do on these things. Again, it doesn't take very much in terms of materials. A few of our roses, red roses here, a white rose over here, a couple of mini carnations, and then some gorgeous pieces of dendrobium orchid to come up with a really, really neat effect. So if we're talking about using this concept of playing with shoes and boots and things, we have the world to choose from because we can actually go to real shoes, real boots, things of that nature, as well as stylized containers that simulate them. What fun! This is really, really neat. And we're seeing a lot of designers starting to play with this. It is such a really, really cool kind of thing to do. Here's another example. Of course, as you realize, shoes come in different sizes with different styles, different kinds of things in them. Here's another example of playing with the same kind of motif. In this particular case, a little bit shorter than this one, a little bit of a different design here. Again, designing on these is very easy. Put your liner in, a couple of roses in the middle, surrounding them with some red roses, and you've got a very, very cute little design, something that is definitely going to make somebody's day, make somebody happy, make somebody smile. And I think that that's the neat thing about some of these novelties, because when you look at something like this, you automatically look at it and smile, because it's just a little different. It's a little unusual. It's not our run-of-the-mill kind of container. It's definitely thinking out of the box and into the shoe. Here's another example. Again, playing with the concept of using an actual shoe. This one's a little bit bigger, and you can see we got a lot more in this particular one. In this particular base, we've got some pink carnations, some darker pink mini carnations, a few of our dendrobium orchids, and then again, some of our larkspur worked up here to give a nice, interesting effect. You can really do infinite number of variations on these kinds of things to come up with some really, really cool ideas. Well, my viewer, what else do we have to show you? Again, we have some very, very neat things here to play with. Oh, how about this? Whoa, this is a shoe. It's a very, very funky one. And in this particular case, we're playing with another different kind of motif here. We're using some of our orange roses, and they're blown open. And notice how easy these things are to achieve. All we did on this something like this is just take them and then just make a cluster of them. And it looks so cool, and it looks really neat. And this particular shoe is a very, very cool shoe. I think you can see, my viewer, that this one gives a really, really neat effect. Here's another one. We got a matching one on this particular one, only in this particular case, we are using a slightly different combination of materials on this. And bear with me, my viewer, while I move a couple of these shoes off, because I want you to see these two. Little contrast. This one is using the orange roses. In this particular case, white roses, and surrounding the white roses, making use of some of our delphinium in this particular case. It's really, really cool. Now, you could make these things up as a pair using unified materials, in other words, using the same materials and the same colors in several of them, or you could simply use a single one to come up with a cool effect. I think the major criteria when you do something like this is you pick something that's kind of funky, something that's kind of fun. You make sure you use a good liner in it. You try to pick something that you're not going to be overly upset if it gets a little damp in the inside. And also, of course, you want to pick something that doesn't look like it's been through the trenches, or something that looks like it's been so used that it's unpleasant to look at. These are pretty mint and pretty nice looking to view. Now, there's one other idea we'd like to share with you, my viewer, before we complete our discussion, and I think you'll enjoy this as well. Many people like to, of course, get very fancy when they're going out, stepping out in style. But as you're aware, shoes have many, many different forms to them and can take many different kinds of configurations. Many of us love to run. Many of us love to run and go out and exercise. How about thinking in terms of something like this for somebody who's athletic or somebody who really enjoys exercising? Here in Boston, we're very, very strong in terms of the Boston Marathon and people running for health and recreation and for enjoyment. Well, how about taking running shoes or sneakers or things like that, and then considering that as a base for some of our containers, for some of our flowers? Again, this is a pretty cool idea, because if you consider when we start playing with something like this, what we're really doing is themating our concept of shoes to the interests of the person who happens to be receiving it. So if you have somebody in your life who's an athlete, who loves to exercise, loves to run, what better way than giving that person a lovely little design, incorporating some flowers in a pair of running shoes or athletic shoes. And once again, we can play with this in so many different ways. In other words, we can vary the materials, we can vary the colors, we can come up with all kinds of effects. Taking the second one of this particular pair, let's show you how this can work. Just bear with me, my viewers, I move things off here. Here are two of our running shoes. These are fairly good size running shoes. And notice in this particular case, we've got our hydrangea here, our hydrangea here. This particular one is a little bit more unified in terms of color, because we're playing more with our blues and our whites here. So we've got our blue hydrangea, we've got some of our delphinium in place in both of these, and then a combination of white roses and a combination of roses and some white tulips to come up with an interesting pair of designs. Well, what do you think, my viewer? Have we sparked your thinking? Are you now starting to think in terms of some of the possibilities in terms of playing with shoes in your floral art? I hope that we have. It's been a pleasure presenting this particular presentation to you. We've all been working very, very hard here at Rittner's to assemble this. In this short period of time, you've seen that we can go in so many different directions. If we think in terms of shoes, boots, things like that, it's a novelty. It's a great different kind of way of looking at containers for our designing. We can play with glass slippers, glass boots, things of that nature. We can play with boots or shoes that are made using the Supermoss products. We can play with different kinds of holiday themes in terms of wicker or other kinds of containers, plastic, that themate holidays like St. Patrick's Day or Christmas. We can go to actual shoes and play with things that are a little bit more high fashion, a little bit fancier, or we can get right down and athletic with some of our running shoes. I hope, my viewer, that this video has sparked you to think in terms of a different kind of base for your designs. Go out, raid that closet, find some shoes, pull out your flowers, pull out some plastic to put inside of them, and have a lot of fun. On behalf of all of us here at Rittner's Floral School, I'm Dr. Steve Rittner. We want to thank you for coming in and visiting with us today.